Okay, we're on the ish now. Okay, thank you all so much for being here. And if it's okay, I'd like to hold all questions and comments until I finish the Bible study. And you'll kind of see why. And then we can delve into everything deeper. I was inspired to name this Bible study, What is a Woman? Because people are trying to dismiss God as the creator and of the universe, and as well as mankind. Women are so important to God, as we see throughout the whole Bible. Most of the women in the Bible that God talks about have some, if not all, the characteristics of Proverbs 31. I believe this is a framework for women to follow. The book of Proverbs has a lot to say about women, good and bad, and how fitting it is to end with the last chapter of Proverbs with a picture of a woman with strong character, great wisdom, and many skills and great compassion. She is typified as an excellent wife and mother, as well as a manufacturer, importer, manager, realtor, farmer, seamstress, upholsterer, and merchant. Her strength and achievements, however, are a result of her reference to God. Surprisingly, her attractiveness is never mentioned. Her attractiveness comes entirely from her character. Now I'm going to read Proverbs 31, and John has got some handouts, some gifts that we wanted to give each woman or each family. And so let me read Proverbs 31 while he's doing that. A wife of noble character, who can find? She is worth far more than rubies. Her husband has full confidence in her and, lacks nothing of value. She brings him good, not harm, all the days of her life. She selects wool and flax and works with eager hands. She is like the merchant ships, bringing her food from afar. She gets up while it is still dark. She provides food for her family and portions for her servant girls. She considers a field and buys it. Out of her earnings, she plants a vineyard. She sets about her work vigorously. Her arms are strong for her task. She sees that her trading is profitable, and her lamp does not go out at night. In her hand, she holds the distaff and grasps the spindle with her fingers. She opens her arm to the poor and extends her hands to the needy. When it snows, she has no fear for her household, for all of them are clothed in scarlet. She makes coverings for her bed. She is clothed in fine linen and purple. Her husband is respected at the city gate, where he takes his seat among the elders of the land. She makes linen garments and sells them, and supplies the merchants with sashes. She is clothed with strength and dignity, and she can laugh at the days to come. She speaks with wisdom, and faithful instruction is on her tongue. She watches over the affairs of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. So I guess no soap operas, maybe. Her children arise and call her blessed. Her husband also, and he praises her. Many women do noble things, but you, all of us, surpass them all. Charm is deceptive and beauty is fleeting, I well know, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. Give her the reward she has earned, and let her works bring her praise at the city gate. So, now I want to take y'all on an adventure. This is a story that every little girl dreams about, and dreams of becoming a princess and finding our prince charming. I have learned many lessons from this book. This book shows how important we are as women to God and how God uses everyone. Excuse me. Using Proverbs 31 to illustrate God's vision of a woman, I would like to look inside the life of a very important woman and her trials and accomplishments. The woman is Esther. Please turn to Esther for an incredible journey. But first, I want to give you some background into her history. The Book of Esther is also known as the Megillot, or the scroll par excellence. It is read in synagogues during Purim. It is the only book that does not mention God's name, but wow, it has his footprints all throughout the Bible. Throughout the book, and I will show you. God used prophets all through the Old Testament, but in Esther, they are absent. So, to me, this is a book for us today, showing how God himself is with us. God has given us this time now, to answer his call. Now, let us read a few verses to show God's plan for us. Romans 15, 4 and 5. For everything that was written in the past was written to teach us, so that through endurance and the encouragement of the Scriptures, we might have hope. Proverbs 30, verse 5. Every word of God is flawless. He is a shield to those who take refuge in him. On the pages of Esther, God overtook a human hand and scripted a young woman's story into his own. This book is a call to courage and perseverance. Esther's story begins in 483 BC and is in the third reign of Xerxes. Now, if I'm looking at it right, Xerxes is sort of like a last name of Wilson or whatever our last name is, and then they have first names in front. So, but for this, I just call him Xerxes. He was 35 years old. Now, this was about 103 years after Nebuchadnezzar had taken the Jews into captivity, which is told in 2 Kings 25. In Ezra, it witnessed the exile twice of some of the people into King Cyrus's realm, which was Judah and Benjamin, from the southern kingdom. The Jews over the years have assimilated into the Persian lifestyle. Now, Esther lived in the kingdom of Persia, the dominant kingdom in the Middle East, after Babylon's fall in 539 BC. Esther's parents may have been among those exiles who chose not to return to Jerusalem, even though Cyrus, the Persian king, had issued a decree allowing them to do so. The Jewish exiles had great freedom in Persia, and many remained there because they had established themselves and or were fearful of the dangerous journey back to their homeland. Now, I'm going to read chapter 1 of Esther, 1 through 9. Some of these chapters I will you kind of have a summary. I hope y'all don't mind when I do that. Let's see. Okay. This is what happened during the time of Xerxes. The Xerxes who ruled over 127 provinces, stretching from India to Kush. At that time, King Xerxes reigned from his royal throne in the citadel of Susa. And in the third year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all his nobles and officials, the military leaders of Persia and Media, the princes and the nobles of the provinces were present. For a full 180 days, He displayed his vast wealth of his kingdom and the splendor and glory of his majesty. When these days were over, the king gave a banquet lasting 7 days in the enclosed garden of the king's palace for all the people, from the least to the greatest, who were in the citadel of Susa. The garden had hangings of white and blue linen, fastened with cords of white linen and purple material, to silver rings on marble pillars. And I can imagine what that must look like. There were couches of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of propia, marble, mother of pearl, and other costly stones. Wine was served in goblets of gold, each one different from the other. And the royal wine was abundant, in keeping with the king's liberality. By the king's command, each guest was allowed to drink in his own way. For the king instructed all the wine stewards to serve each man what he wished. King Vashti also gave a banquet for the women in the royal palace of King Xerxes. King Xerxes, which was the son of King Cyrus and the 5th king, he inherited his wealth. In other words, the king was spoiled and proud and impulsive. Xerxes wanted to show off all his wealth and power. He was the wealthiest, one of the wealthiest people in the world, and it's suggested by scholars that he gave this 180-day exhibit, which was 6 months, of his vast wealth to inspire the Persians with confidence in preparation of the massive and disastrous military campaign against Greece, which began the same year as the banquet, which was 483 BC. At the end of 180 days, he held a week-long banquet for everyone, and his wife also gave a banquet for the women. Now, I'm going to summarize 10 through 12. On the 7th day, King Xerxes, in high spirits, sent 7 eunuchs to bring his wife to him to display her beauty. Queen Vashti refused to parade before an all-male party, possibly because it was against Persian custom for a woman to appear before a public gathering of men. This conflict between Persian custom and the king's command put her in a very difficult situation, and she chose to refuse her half-drunk husband, hoping maybe he would come to his senses later.
Don't look at me.
I'm sorry. I'll just at key points look at you. Also, some have suggested that she was pregnant with Artaxerxes, who was born in 483 BC, and that she did not want to be seen in public in that condition, and who can blame her? For whatever reason, she refused the king, and he was furious. This showed he had no control over his wife, while he was trying to impress all these important officials from all over the land. Or maybe she was just tired of having to obey his every command. Okay, 13 through 22 is another summary. So Xerxes, as his custom, consulted with experts as in matters of law and justice. There were 7 wise men close to the king, and decided that her disrespect of the king would show women in the kingdom that they could show the same disrespect to their husbands, in the same way that King Vashti did. The king issued a royal decree that could not be repealed, that women were to respect their husbands from the least to the greatest. Every man should be ruler over his own household. I am sure this did not sit well with women. And if you can imagine the conversations or quarrels the households had with what Queen Vashti did to her husband. Now, summary of chapter 2, 1 through 4. He may have been missing his queen and what she had done for him, but also he remembered his anger. So his personal attendants suggested a search for beautiful young virgins. Could it be that the king was very hard to deal with since his queen had left and they needed to placate him by bringing in all these beautiful young virgins to replace her? I think they were very anxious to get him a new wife. Now, I'm going to read on 5 through 7 on chapter 2. Now, there was in the citadel of Susa a Jew of the tribe of Benjamin named Mordecai, son of Jar, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, who had been carried into exile from Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. Among those taken captive with Jehoiakim, a king of Judah, Mordecai had a cousin named Hadassah, whom he had brought up because she had neither father nor mother. This girl, who was also known as Esther, was lovely in form and features, and Mordecai had taken her as his own daughter when her father and mother died. Now, Mordecai here, of course, enters the picture. He was a Jew and an exile. He was a descendant of King Saul and came from the tribe of Benjamin, son of Kish. He was a compassionate man who needed a family. This Jewish population had been carried into exile from Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar. Since Hadassah, which is her Jewish name, and the word means myrtle, and which means blessing. She was orphaned. Mordecai, who was her cousin, brought her up and loved her so much. She was also known as Esther in her Persian name and means star and comes from the verbal root in Hebrew, star, S-T-R, which means the meaning of it is to conceal or hidden. A summary of 8 through 10, chapter 2. So many young virgins were brought to the palace to an eunuch named Hegai, who is the head of the harem. Esther was so beautiful, but what stood out more than anything was that she was most kind and respectful. And Hegai saw in her something much deeper than her physical desirability, more so than in all the other girls. So Hegai gave her the full beauty treatment. Mordecai had forbidden her to reveal her being a Jew because there was prejudice against the Jews, even though most were culturally assimilated to blend in. Mordecai and Esther had not forgotten their God in their daily disciplines, as we will soon find out how they honored God. I'm going to read verse 11 of chapter 2. Every day, Mordecai walked back and forth near the courtroom of the harem to find out how Esther was and what was happening to her. Mordecai, who was so worried about his beloved Hadassah, that he stayed close to the courtyard of the harem to see how she was, just like any loving father would do. Maybe he was hopeful she would be chosen and promoted to a position of influence on behalf of the Jews. Well, there's God's handprint right there. I'm going to read 12 through 14. Before a girl's turn came to go into King Xerxes, she had to complete 12 months of beauty treatments prescribed for the women, 6 months with oil of myrrh, and 6 with perfume and cosmetics. And this is how she would go to the king. Anything she wanted was given to her to take with her, and from the harem to the king's palace. In the evening, she would go there, and in the morning return to another part of the harem to the care of Zazgaz, the king's eunuch, who was in charge of the concubines. She would not return to the king unless he was pleased with her and summoned her by name. These implications would not be comforting to any parental figure to know that about your daughter. In stark contrast to King Xerxes, King Jesus gave himself in greatest love for his bride so that he could cover us with garments of salvation and robes of righteousness. We will dwell in bright, broad daylight of Christ's glorious presence. Psalm 62:7. My salvation and my honor depend on God. She waited 12 months and had all kinds of beauty treatments. Verse 15 tells us that when her time came to meet the king, Esther asked for nothing other than what was suggested. She won the favor of everyone, including the king. The word, quote, attracted to, in the New International Version, means loved. God had the king's heart in his hand and directed it where God pleased it to go. God gave this gift to Esther to be married to a man that genuinely loved her and would give her anything that she requested. What more can a woman ask for than to be truly loved, and a man too? The king gave a great banquet in her honor, without worrying whether she'd show up or not. He proclaimed a holiday and distributed gifts to everyone, and with royal liberty. God placed Esther on the throne even before the Jews faced the possibility of complete destruction, so that when trouble came, a person would already be in position to help. Another handprint of God. Now, summary of chapter 2, 19 through 23. Esther continued to follow her cousin's advice and kept her secret nationality, which is thank goodness for that. Now, Mordecai and others who sat at the king's gate were official, sort of governmental employees who functioned as eyes and ears of the ruler. Mordecai and colleagues were like members of the king's secret police. Now, 2 of the king's officers who guarded the doorway became angry with the king. Their names were Bigthana, which to me sounds like big thug, and Teresh, which sounds to me like the trash, as in something like a garbage can to me. Mordecai's action on the king's behalf shows that a Jew can also be an excellent citizen. In modern times, those stories of Mordecai, Joseph, and Daniel, we cannot have not read about them without realizing what an excellent citizens they were. And indeed, a conflict of interest may come and has come to many, but each of us, until it does, can take to ourselves the exhortation which in God's name the prophet Jeremiah addressed to the exiles in Babylon to, quote, seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you. Jeremiah 29:7. When Mordecai found out about the plot, he told Queen Esther, who in turn told the king, giving credit to Mordecai. After investigation, the 2 officials were hung. All of this was recorded in the king's annals in the presence of the king. Now, the king did not reward Mordecai, which in Persia, that could have had several benefits, including as a hero, which would mean being exempted from bowing to other nobles. Did he forget to reward Mordecai? Or is this another handprint of God? Chapter 3, summary 1 through 4. For whatever reason, King Xerxes honored Haman with a seat of honor higher than all other nobles, which Mordecai should have had. But consider the history of these 2 men. Haman is a presumed Amalekite and a descendant of Agag during Saul's reign, and Mordecai is a descendant of King Saul. Haman's ancestors were ancient enemies of Israel, and God had commanded Israel to blot out the memory of Amalek under heaven. This is found in Deuteronomy 25:17 through 19. Remember what the Amalekites did to you along the way when you came out of Egypt. When you were weary and worn out, they met you on the journey and cut off all who were lagging behind. They had no fear of God. When the Lord your God gives you rest from all your enemies around you in the land he has given you to possess as an inheritance, you shall blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. Do not forget. The name Haman sounds similar to the Hebrew word for raft, which is Heman. So Haman had in his history an angry and aggressive, hated view of the Jews. All of the king's officials knelt down to him, but Mordecai would not kneel or pay him honor. He only knelt down before God. He knew what God had said about the Amalekites and would never bow down. Another handprint of God. A summary of verses 5 through 6. After he found out about Mordecai being a Jew, his hatred really grew, and he saw the opportunity to not only kill Mordecai, but all the Jews. The Hebrew word hama, which is anger, is a very strong term referring to an inner and emotional heat which rises and is fanned to varying degrees to a burning and consuming raft. Within the Book of Esther, the term is used 4 times for the king and 2 times for Haman. Now I'm going to read 7, chapter 3, 7 through 15, to give us a clear picture. In the 12th year of King Xerxes, in the first month, the month of Nisan, they cast the pur, that is called the lot, in the presence of Haman, to select a day and month. And the lot fell on the 12th month, the month of Adar. Then Haman said to King Xerxes, "There is a certain people dispersed and scattered among the peoples of the provinces of your kingdom, whose customs are different from those of all the other people, and who do not obey the king's laws. It is not in the king's best interest to tolerate them. If it pleases the king, let a decree be issued to destroy them, and I will put 10,000 talents of silver into the royal treasury for the men who carry out this business." Let's see. So the king took the signet ring from his finger, gave it to Haman, son of the Agagite, the enemy of the Jews. "Keep the money," the king said to Haman, "and do with the people as you please." Then on the 13th day of the first month, the royal secretaries were summoned. They wrote out the script of each province and the language of each people, all Haman's orders to the king's satraps, the governors in various provinces, and the nobles of various peoples. They were written in the name of King Xerxes himself and sealed with his own ring. Haman, as it says, cast lots in the first month, which was Nisan, to determine the best day to carry out his decree. The exact day the royal secretaries were summoned to draft the edict and dispatch the news was on the 13th day of Nisan. Passover is on the 14th. If they celebrated only one feast day, it would have probably been Passover. So Haman did not know he was playing into the hands of God, for the day of death was set for almost a year away, giving Esther time to make her plea to the king. The Persian word for lots was Purim. In Nisan, the Passover month, the lot was cast and it fell on Adar, which is March. Proverbs 16:33. The lot is cast into the lap, but its every decision is from the Lord. In Proverbs 6:16 through 19. There are 6 things the Lord hates, 7 that are detestable to him: haughty eyes, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked schemes, feet that are quick to rush into evil, a false witness who pours out lies, and a man who stirs up dissension among brothers. These are traits God hates, and Haman did them all. He wanted the Jews destroyed, killed, and annihilated. So, if God delivered them from the Egyptians, he could surely deliver them from the Persians. Sometimes God uses the winds of a new threat to blow the dust off a past miracle that is moved from our active file into the archives. Remember what God has done for us. If God delivered us from a Pharaoh, then he can deliver us from any Haman. Remember who we are. I'm going to read the next chapter 4 is to me the essence of the book. It's the most important book of Esther. I'm going to read 1 through 5. When Mordecai learned of all that had been done, he tore his clothes, he put on sackcloth and ashes, and went into the city, wailing loudly and bitterly. But he went only as far as the king's gate, because no one clothed in sackcloth was allowed to enter it. In every province to which the edict and order of the king came, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, weeping, and wailing. Some lay in sackcloth and ashes. When Esther's maids and eunuchs came and told her about Mordecai, she was in great distress. She sent clothes for him to put on instead of his sackcloth, but he would not accept them. Then Esther summoned Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs assigned to attend to her, and ordered him to find out what was troubling Mordecai and why. Since chapter 4 is the essence of the book to me, Esther did not know what was wrong with Mordecai. She was so secluded that she did not know what was happening in the province and with her people. Sackcloth and ashes symbolize not only the Jews' poverty of spirit before the Lord, but their complete sadness without him. Esther wanted him to look like everyone else, and she was worried about him because she didn't know what was going on. I'm going to read, 6 through 11. So Hathach went out to Mordecai in the open square of the city in front of the king's gate. Mordecai told him everything that had happened to him, including the exact amount of money Haman had promised to pay into the royal treasury for the destruction of the Jews. He also gave him a copy of the text of the edict for the annihilation, which had been published in Susa, to show to Esther and explain it to her. And he told him to urge her to go into the king's presence, to pray for mercy, and to plead for her people. Hathach went back and reported to Esther what Mordecai had said. Then she instructed him to say to Mordecai, "Hey, all the king's officials and the people of the royal provinces know that for any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned, and the king has but one law, and that is that he's going to be put to death. The only exception to this is for the king to extend the gold scepter to him and spare his life. But 30 days have passed since I was called to go to the king." So after Mordecai had told Hathach everything that Haman had persuaded the king to issue the edict, Esther told Mordecai she could die by approaching the king without being summoned by him. Haman's death decree was against all Jews in the Persian Empire. It would have included the land of Israel. If this decree had been carried out, all of God's chosen people could have been exterminated. And God's plan to send his son to earth as a Jew could have been ruined. But God's plans cannot be stopped. Haman was doomed to fail. Now, read 12 through 14. When Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, he sent back this answer. Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. But you and your father's family will perish, which meant Mordecai. And who knows but that you have come to a royal position for such as this. Then Esther, let's see, I think it was just through there. Mordecai was very honest with Esther. For if she remained silent at this time and did not help the Jews, then relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. But you and your family, father's family, will perish. And she knew it would be Mordecai. And who knows but that you have come to a royal position for such a time as this. Now, I have several scriptures to read in between this. One is Hebrews 12, 1 and 2. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders us and the sin that so easily entangles. And let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. Let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith. Psalm 138, 3. When I called, you answered me. You made me bold and stout-hearted. Jeremiah 29, 11. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. Joel 2, 13 and 14. He may turn and have pity and leave behind a blessing. And Jonah 3, 8 and 9. But let man and beast be covered with sackcloth. Let everyone call urgently on God. Let them give up their evil ways and their violence. Who knows? God may relent and with compassion and turn from his fierce anger so that we will not perish. Now, this is the most vital section of the book, which is Mordecai's eloquent appeal to Esther. The hard truth of Mordecai's exhortation to Esther also applies to us. We can refuse to walk in obedience to God and cower in fear from our calling, and he undoubtedly will still accomplish his agenda. But as for us, we will pass up the fulfillment of our own entire life purpose, and we will miss a mighty work. The most frequent command in the Bible is, don't be afraid. Now, I must tell you a story about myself and fear. One Sabbath, I had listened to a tape, mostly about it, you guessed it, fear. I was so excited. I could not wait to get on the computer to talk about fear and the fear that Esther must have had. Well, I sat down and I hit the button to turn on the computer and nothing happened. I kept trying, so then I called John. He tried then. He tried and nothing happened, so then he gets out his electronic instrument. And by this time, my fear is starting to build. Then John uttered the terrible words, "It is dead." Well, the tears and the stress really started building. I cried to him, that I could not begin to rebuild this Bible study again. He put his loving arms around me, and I'll cry, and said, "Don't worry, God is in control. Do not be afraid, it will all work out." Well, it did. He took out the old drive and copied it to the new computer, and voila, there was my Bible study. I was so disappointed in myself for letting fear overtake me, but I did learn a very important lesson, and that is that I thought I'd already learned, but evidently not very good, and that is, don't let fear overtake you. Now I'm going to read, finishing up on this chapter 4, 15 and 17, just real short. Now, then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai, "Go, gather together all the Jews who are in Susa, and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my maids will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish." So Mordecai went away and carried out all of Esther's instructions. As hard as trusting can be, living with constant fears is harder. A momentous element of the fast in Esther is a profound implication of prayer. They were asking and recognizing God for deliverance. Another handprint of God. Esther knew the power of prayer, for she asked her maids to pray and fast too. She knew the chances she was taking, but was willing to do the will of God. She faced her fears. Esther didn't get to choose the hand she was dealt, but she chose to make a difference with the one life she had been given. Esther tells Mordecai to blow the trumpet and commanded a fast for all Jews of Susa to see if the Lord may relent from sending this calamity on her people. Joel 2:12. "Even now, declares the Lord, return to me with all your heart, with fasting and weeping and mourning." This is the first time Esther identifies herself with God's people and responds to the prophetic call to repentance by joining with the Jews of Susa in this fast. Just like Esther, you were born for such a time as this, right where we are. You came at the right time. You are not an accident. God knew you were coming, and he prepared for you. Your life is for a divine purpose. There is, in your little bag, there is an affirmation card that reminded me so much of Esther and her attributes. I thought you might enjoy having this to read. Now, chapter 5, 1 through 7, a summary. Esther chose the 3rd day of the fast to put on her royal robes and approach the king. Hosea 6:2. It says, "After 2 days he will revive us. On the 3rd day he will restore us, that we may live in his presence." God's handprint was definitely with Esther when she approached the king. God gave her the confidence to approach him and know that he was with her. God chooses to work through those willing to work for him. We should avoid 2 extremes. One is doing nothing, and the other is that we feel we got to do everything. God put in the king's heart his love for Esther and gladness to see her. The king knew something was bothering Esther, and he asked, "What is it?" The Hebrew word malak, translated is "what is it," is also translated troubling or ailing. So what is troubling you? What is ailing you? The king put her above Haman by offering her half his kingdom. Her request for a banquet for the king and Haman may have been for Haman to know her and see his relationship between her and the king, and this was also a clever move on Esther's part to disarm Haman and make him think he is the center of attention. This played to Haman's personal weakness. The king knew something was still bothering her and wanted to respect her request and petition, so she asked to have another banquet the next night for the king and Haman. Well, maybe she was thinking, why do today when I can do it tomorrow? I have a picture on my wall that says, today is the tomorrow that worried you yesterday, and all is well. Ecclesiastes 3, verse 1 and verse 7. There's a time for everything and a season for every activity under heaven. Verse 7, a time to be silent and a time to speak. Habakkuk 2, 3. For a revelation awaits for an appointed time. It speaks of the end and will not prove false. Though it linger, wait for it. It will certainly come and will not delay. Summary of chapter 5, 9 through 14. Now Haman plays right into Esther's hands. She touches his ego big time, and he brags to his wife that not only about his wealth and so on, but that the queen had invited him to dinner. His wife and friends suggested that he go ahead and build these gallows for Mordecai, and so he did. Haman was so addicted to Mordecai that his hatred of him became a preoccupation, and so caused the most outrageous irony of all. Haman bowed down to Mordecai. We serve whatever masters us. Christ's purpose in calling us to deny ourselves so that we deny our selfishness, ambition, past, or any damaged emotions for the right to cheat us of his higher plans for us. It is so sorry that Haman didn't know this. Now, chapter 6, 1 through 14, I'm going to have a summary. Now, God's handprint kept the king awake to read his diary that night, or Chronicles. So he found earmarked the account of Mordecai saving his life. And if you remember back, Mordecai didn't get any recognition for that. So the king thought, so no mention of it, and that was recognized for Mordecai's bravery. So the king sent for his main man, Haman, and asked, what is to be done to honor a man that the king wants to honor? Well, of course, Haman thinks the king is talking about himself, so he really puts out the most impressive honor he could fantasize of, since he thinks it's for him. God is probably laughing at this, and we also can see God's handprint. Then the king really puts Haman in his place, and he tells him to honor Mordecai, the man he hates so vehemently. I'll stop here again, if you don't mind, and tell you my Haman story of my greed that I experienced, and so ashamed to tell, but I think it's just reminding me of Haman. And one day I got a notice in the mail that if I gave $100 to St. Jude's Hospital, it would give me a chance to win a beautiful and expensive house in a very wealthy neighborhood in Williamson County. So I gave $200 to St. Jude's Hospital, and instead of thinking how much I could help children, my only thought was that I was going to win a house. I had no doubt that I would win. I felt it in my inner being. Upon leaving my house to go to the post office in White Bluff, I was thinking about the house and how I was going to win it. And in a very short distance I was traveling, was going very fast in a 45-mile speed zone. There was a highway patrolman just waiting for me. He pulled me over, and I could tell by the way he was walking that I was going to get a ticket. Well, I did. I didn't look at the ticket until I got to the post office. I didn't think it'd be very much. So can you guess how much the ticket was? $200. And in case you were wondering, I did not win the house. So can you imagine Mordecai's amazement by seeing God is working with everyone to execute his plan? He knew God was in charge and everything would be okay. If the Jews had been annihilated, the promised Savior could not have come from this bloodline. And don't think for a moment that Satan wasn't trying to slip Xerxes' signet ring on his own invisible finger. Satan was aware from the first prophecy that the Messiah would come from Judah. Satan tried so often to destroy the Jews. God's word is not only his bond, but it is also his very breath. Now, chapter 7, a summary of 1 through 6. The wine course is the last course in a Persian meal. So I can't imagine the nervousness Esther must have felt. But she had come this far, and she knew she had to take her chances. And by doing this, she really opens herself up to be killed or saved when she asked the king to grant her life and spare her people. She appealed to his love for her. Then the king finally asked, "Who is this person?" And Esther answers, "The adversary and enemy is this vile Haman." What a relief this must have been for Esther. Finally, God can right a wrong. The king left in a rage and had to leave his wine and try to understand what had just happened. After he left, Haman, in his terror, begged Esther to intervene to save his life, and in doing so, fell on her while she was reclining, only in time for the king to come in and see Haman possibly molesting his wife in the king's own home. Boy, this really made him angrier. One of the eunuchs told the king about the gallows that were built for Mordecai, and Haman was hung on them instead. Another handprint of God. As often, history repeats itself. Hitler was the same as Haman in that he wanted to annihilate the Jews. Psalm 7, 15 and 16. He who digs a hole and scoops it out falls into the pit he has made. The trouble he causes recoils on itself. His violence comes down on its own head. Chapter 8, 1 through 17, another summary. Aptly called, this chapter is a reversal of destiny. So Esther was given Haman's estate. She also said she was a relative of Mordecai, a Jew, and the king gave his signet ring to Mordecai, and Esther gave him Haman's estate. But they still had the same problem. Annihilation of the Jews was still in effect. No document can be revoked that is written in the king's name and sealed with his signet ring. So they came up with an idea for Mordecai to devise a plan that would offset the first decree that Haman wrote because they could not cancel it. So the secretaries were summoned, and they wrote out all the orders to the Jews, the satraps, governors, and nobles from India to Cush. Mordecai wrote it in the name of the king and used the signet ring, and it was dispatched. The plan was that the Jews had the right to assemble and protect themselves, to destroy, kill, and annihilate any armed force that might attack them and their women and children. The day appointed to do this was the very day the Jews were to be killed. Reversal of destiny. God's handprint all over. The Jews were feasting and celebrating. They were happy. Many people of other nationalities became Jews because fear of the Jews had seized them. Summary of chapter 9:1. God turned the tables, which resulted in a reversal of destiny, and the edict commanded by the king was to be carried out. The enemies of the Jews were to destroy all Jews, but now the Jews had the upper hand. and had the hope to overpower them. The Jews weren't just delivered, they were empowered. Deuteronomy 33:29. Blessed are you, O Israel, who is like you, a people saved by the Lord. He is your shield and helper and your glorious sword. Your enemies will cower before you, and you will trample down their high places. Compare this with Nehemiah 4:14, and of course this is when they're building that wall, and this is part of what Nehemiah said. After I looked things over, I stood up and said to the nobles, the officials, and the rest of the people, don't be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, who is great and awesome, and fight for your brothers, your sons and your daughters, your wives and your homes. So, every time we are in a tight fist of fear, remember that you are in something much tighter. Isaiah 49:16 says, see, I have engraved, which is hold tightly, you in the palm of my hand. Your walls are ever before me. God has held us so tight that it cuts us into the palm of his hand. He is always there for us. So this fear was an example of what the Jews faced when their enemies were going to kill them. So Haman had decreed that on the 13th day of the 12th month, anyone could kill the Jews and take their property. Mordecai's decree could not be reversed from this decree because no law signed by the king could be repealed. Instead, Mordecai had the king to sign a new law, giving the Jews the right to fight back. When the dreaded day arrived, there was much fighting, but the Jews killed only those who wanted to kill them, and they did not take any of the possessions, even though they could have. God's handprint again. 1 Timothy 1:18 and 19. Timothy, my son, I give you this instruction in keeping with the prophecies once made about you, so that by following them you may fight the good fight, holding on to faith and a good conscience. Some have rejected these and so have shipwrecked their faith. Mordecai recorded these events and sent out letters to all Jews throughout the provinces of King Xerxes to have them celebrate annually the 14th and 15th days of the month of Adar. This is the time when the Jews got relief from their enemies, when their sorrow turned into joy. So even today, some Jews celebrate Purim as a day of feasting and joy, as we in America celebrate the 4th of July as a day from our oppressors, England. Could not our independence from England have the same handprint of God? Purim is on the 14th and 15th day of Adar, which next year will be March 6th and 7th. They read the Book of Esther and celebrate with a meal. In the Book of Esther, we clearly see God at work in the lives of individuals and in the affairs of a nation. Even when it looks like the world is in the hands of evil people, God is still in control, protecting those who are his. Although we may not understand everything happening around us, we must trust in God's protection and retain our integrity by doing what we know is right. Esther, who risked her life by appearing before the king, became a hero. Mordecai, who was effectively condemned to die, rose to become the second highest ranking official in the nation. Reversal of destiny. No matter how hopeless our situation and our condition, or how much we would like to give up, we need not despair. God is in control of our world. Not every one of us who embraces the glory of God as our purpose will end up doing great things precisely because we do God things. Esther's worth was above rubies, for she with God's deliverance, saved the Jews. I think that through this study that, for me, that I have done, that I proved what is a woman. I'd like to read, and it's in your book, one last thing, on the poem, Why. And I think this was very much told or looked at what Esther did. Some men just sit beneath a tree to think and cry. Some men go down beside the sea to wonder why. Some men towards heaven turn their gaze, while others sit and downward look as in a daze. With one accord, men turn at times to sober thought and wonder if their lives, when done, will count for aught. At such a time, wise men will question each past goal that failed when tested in life's mixing bowl. 'Tis all the same when we some goals have failed to reach, as when we lose some cherished friend through awkward breach. For each the time has come to sit and think, to mend the broken chain with stronger link. But what the plan, then we should ask, if why remains? How long to sit and ponder o'er those sad refrains? How long to sit and ponder, how will I know that next will come success? What hope that life can bring me happiness? Perhaps the answer lies within the realm, that I should go and let Christ take the helm. And one last Bible verse, Isaiah 40:31. But those that wait upon the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not faint. So thank y'all very much for this opportunity. Thank you. Oh, it's over. Oh, yes. Any questions? Or anybody would like to? We direct them to Michael and Bernard.
Hello? All right. Here we go. Got to talk. It's interesting. I don't mean to tell on Carol, who is very dear to me. I know she was nervous about doing this. Not because she had done it last year. She wasn't nervous about doing a seminar. She was nervous because she was moved in her heart over the testimony of what happened in Mel and Bernard's congregation. And she was moved to turn a situation that was so negative, and so, because we all hurt with you. And she wanted to take a negative and turn it into a positive for you. And that was her motivation for doing this. So we hope it was a healing salve for you.
I do have a question. When you say reversal, I do have a question. I don't know. Just when you say reversal of destiny, I have a hard time with that word destiny. I don't, I mean, I believe that, I don't know. What do they mean when they say destiny like that?
Well, in their eyes, Haman and the king and all of them, in their eyes, the destiny was that all the Jews would be killed, and Mordecai would be, killed, and so everything changed. So it was, yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. So it was just an upside thing down, They were way up here, Haman was way up here, but then.
It would have been man's plan.
Mm-hmm,
Okay.
mm-hmm,
Sometimes, you hear people say
yeah,
it's
mm-hmm,
their destiny.
mm-hmm,
I believe our destiny
mm-hmm.
is being with Yah, and that's
Not gonna be on the thing, you do not get the mic. I'll take you.
We're going to let Erica do it because I'm not doing it good. We're going to let the expert do it.
Okay, start again.
I just was thinking that I understand better because it was just like I was thinking that was man's plan for them. When some people say destiny, I hear people say, well, your destiny is this or that, but I still think we have a choice in everything, but this was man's plan for them. That's just what I was trying to figure out for sure.
Well, she read it. Destiny could apply to, are you here for such a time as this? You could look at destiny and that God prepared ahead of time for this event to take place so he could rescue his people. And that for such a time as this would relate to the idea of destiny also. God had a hand in what was going to occur.
I was just going to say thank you for bringing out another side of Vashti's refusal. I've never heard it explained that way. That she might have had a good reason to refuse to come out there in front of a bunch of drunks. I've been partying for 6 months.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it wasn't just just straight rebellion. She had a reason.
It wasn't what now?
Just rebellious attitude. She had a reason not to want to do that.
The reason.
The queen did,
Oh,
she had a
Queen
reason to
Vashti.
not want
Yeah,
to do that.
What I was saying is just conjecture, you know, being pregnant, maybe she didn't want to come out, or. Yeah, I mean, he was half-drunk husband.
She wasn't invited to the main banquet.
That's
It was
right,
at the
yeah,
end.
At the end, when he
And I
wanted to
thought,
show her off.
Now you
yeah.
don't invite me, so.
Yeah. Yeah, you can't blame her.
I was just going to refer to the scripture concerning like destiny, the scripture that says, man makes plans, but God's plans prevail, or God's will prevails.
That's right, yeah.
So when we got into the Purim Esther thing this spring, I asked some brethren a question, do y'all think Christ kept Purim? Well, of course he did, but he was Jewish. I mean, it was part of their tradition. There is some speculation to remember when the guy was laying there at the pool of water and couldn't get in, and Christ came down and healed him. There is some speculation that actually happened on Purim. I'm not positive, but it's a good study to look into. So, yeah, people do what?
Sounds like another study. You want to comment?
Okay, he just said it has to be, but if you're going to comment further, you need to wait for the microphone, please. And you have.
The very next chapter it says it was just prior to the Feast of Passover. And it can't be Feast of Tabernacles or Passover because it's not named. The Feast of John 5:1 is an unnamed feast. But it has to be a month before Passover. And it can't be a feast dedication because John in chapter 10, he names the Feast of Dedication, the Feast of Lights, which is Hanukkah. It has to be, like you said, Roger.
Purim. Darla has a comment.
Yeah, I just want to say, that there's multiple accounts in the Bible of how strong and courageous women were. They were willing to sacrifice and give up their lives to do for their people. And that's what we're striving to do now. We are turning our lives over to Christ. Are we willing to lay down our life like Esther was going to do for the people? That's what we're fighting for. And Carol, I thank you for bringing this out. When Mel brought this up in the church, it was awful. It was awful what she went through, the persecution, the accusations. And I went because I really did not know the Book of Esther at all. So I went and read it over and over and over and over. And when her and Bernard had left to go do their Purim party, there were some things being said around, and I was able to say, no, you're misunderstanding. This is wrong, what you're pulling out or what you're trying to say.
Yeah.
The only way we're going to learn and to know is to dig. We got to dig and study and dig and study. And it's not always up to the man to teach us to dig and study. We got to do some of this on our own to learn. And, we are to be iron sharpening iron, and that's what we continue to do. So I'm thankful that you done this. And I wasn't going to come, but I come anyway, so I'm here, and God wanted me to hear it, and thank you. And Mel, see, you wasn't wrong, so hang in there, girl.
It wasn't me totally. I mean, Bernard can testify to this. Maybe I'm just really flighty or something, but I never felt like it was persecution. It was just like I was already there, and it just was Yah's doing. It was nothing I did. You know, guys know what I'm saying. Don't say that to me. It was totally Yah. It was just like we were already up there. We knew that it's in the Bible. And if it's like, the question is that if you're going to not let me teach the kids about Esther, what's going to be the next book that you're going to take out? And that was the only question. It was just like, I knew that if that wasn't, and Bernard and I were both in agreement, if this was going to be the way they were going to go, then we needed to be somewhere else. And that's just, that's not us at all, right, Bernard? I mean, it was not me. Don't give me any credit there. It was totally No, it really was. It really was.
One of the criticisms I think you might have heard of Esther was that they took vengeance on their enemies. But in Deuteronomy 17, if somebody was caught trying to pull off some kind of whatever crime it was, and they were caught, whatever punishment, whatever they were trying to inflict on their neighbor was to be inflicted on them. And let's face it, he wanted to wipe out the entire Jewish race. So, the Jews had to defend themselves, and they were well within their rights.
Todd, you had said something, or Regina, you did that we say that Yah isn't actually listed in there, but you said that through a certain way that actually his name was written in there. Could you describe that?
Look, I'm mobile too. I can go over there, if I need to. Well, the thing about Book of E.W. Bullinger's Companion Bible, how many have one of those, a Companion Bible? Okay, so that used to be a go-to resource in the church back in the day. And he has a whole appendix dedicated to the Yahweh's name appearing in acrostic form in the Book of Esther 5 times. And it's not happenstance that it occurs in that manner. So for those two, that was also the other criticism that you were getting there in Hendersonville from this fellow, that I think, if I'm not mistaken, that it didn't, that Yahweh's name didn't occur there. Well, I'm sorry, it is there, and he hasn't done his homework.
I was just saying I feel bad too because I didn't either know it was there. Well, we did it that time. We didn't, right? We did. So we have to, maybe you could do a study on that. But I didn't know that either.
Send an email to Bernard that has basically quoted from Bullinger's appendix.
Questions or comments? Anybody?
We're talking about women. I'm not going to talk about Esther. I'm going to talk about Job's wife. And in the scripture, it kind of comes off like she's an old nag. And she may have been. But we didn't think about what she had been through. She had lost all her children. She had lost everything as well as Job. But maybe she should have been a little nicer to him. But it's understandable why she was the way she was.
There we go.
Very, very short comment from another study that I've done. When you were reading the Proverbs 31 woman, the line that says she provides food for her, she rises early in the morning and provides food for her family. It does not say she rises early in the morning and prepares food for her family. There are many there are other places that indicate that she may have actually went out on a morning hunt, or she went out, I mean, there's a little more to it than just whether, I'm just saying.
Well, since we're talking Proverbs 31 woman, when I was in India, I got to see a living example. So did Rianne. Ama Ruth was a living epitome of getting up while it was still dark. Rianne knows. She was there, we saw it, and she would start making preparation, not just for herself and her immediate family, but the entire congregation. And she would do that, and not just the meals, but she would also then go out and preach. And she would also help take care of the finances, and she was a pillar of the community. All of those things you read, she was a living epitome of that, in a way. So I got to see what that looks like in a third world setting, and it was amazing. It was like the scriptures coming alive.
Uh-oh.
I have one question for everyone, mainly the women and then secondarily the men. Is this a time for us? Are we here for a time for us today? Such a time as this, that's correct. Yeah. So it is, in Esther, it was quite obvious that that was her time. And we, I think, would be amiss if we were to think that we don't have those kind of times about us now for every single one of us individually or as a group. You agree?
Yeah, that was really my whole purpose in the whole study in Esther. It was my whole purpose in studying the Book of Esther was that to get across that this is our time and that we're not to be afraid of whatever comes to us, but that we are to know God's with us and to trust Him, just like Esther did. But that was my whole purpose of the study in the book and seeing all the different things that happened to her and her father, adopted father. So, yeah, God's handprint. Yeah.